Roman emperor clipping the edges off silver coins have to do with why you, literally can't afford a house today?
I mean, it sounds like some sort of bizarre riddle, right? But it's the exact blueprint for how the modern global economy operates.
Yeah. And today's deep dive is pulling from a stack of just incredible sources to figure out why the financial world feels so upside down right now.
Right.
We're looking at Vivek Kaul's Easy Money trilogy, Christopher Leonard's reporting in The Lords of Easy Money, and this really deep-cut critical review of central banking by a former Federal Reserve Bank president, William Poole.
Which is fascinating.
It is. So our mission today is to decode the history of money, uncover how the global financial system actually works behind closed doors, and explain how the invisible levers being pulled by central banks are, directly impacting your wallet.
Because you probably feel like the economy is rigged. I hear this all the time.
Oh, constantly.
And frankly, if you look at the math, you aren't crazy. Your wages are stagnant, your grocery bill is climbing every single month, yet somehow the stock market just keeps breaking records.
It makes absolutely zero sense on the surface. But we are going to connect the dots between ancient history and the modern money printer so you can finally understand the game being played with your savings.
Exactly.
And, well, to understand the game, we have to start at the very beginning. To figure out why money is broken today, you have to understand how it was invented. And the most crucial concept here is that gold became the ultimate global currency, precisely because it is virtually useless.
Yeah, that's such a wild concept to wrap your head around. So think about the early barter systems. The sources point out that barter has a massive fatal flaw called the mutual coincidence of wants.
Oh, what?
Mutual coincidence of wants. So let's say you have eggs and you want salt. You have to find someone who not only has salt, but specifically wants your eggs.
Right. And if the salt guy wants, I don't know, sugar,
then you are out of luck. You can't make a trade. In a simple economy with just 1,000 different goods, barter requires almost 500,000 different exchange rates. It's a complete logistical nightmare.
So people tried using other things as money, right? Like wheat, rice, iron. But that created a totally different disaster.
A catastrophic disaster, actually, because when you use a practical commodity as money, you are taking it away from its primary use.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if a society uses wheat as money, people hoard wheat in their basements to save their wealth. And what happens?
There's no wheat to make bread.
Exactly. There is less wheat to actually eat. The price of food skyrockets and people literally starve. And if you use iron as money, you don't have enough iron to make plows for the fields or, swords for defense. Industry just hulks entirely.
Okay, wait, let me get this straight. Gold's entire resume is that it refuses to do any real work. It's the ultimate slacker metal, and that is why it got the top job.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, you can't make a good weapon out of it. You can't build a bridge with it.
Precisely. As the analyst Dylan Grice points out in the sources, gold is unaffected by industrial demand because there is virtually no industrial demand. It's as soft as putty.
Wow.
Hoarding gold hurts absolutely no one. You aren't taking food out of a starving person's mouth or steal away from a builder. It is a placeholder of value that doesn't disrupt the real physical economy.
See, that completely destroys the misconception that money must have intrinsic practical utility to be valuable.
Yeah.
It's actually the exact opposite. Its lack of utility is its superpower.
Yes. And if you're listening to this and wondering how to protect yourself today, you really need to reevaluate what you consider a safe haven asset. You want to look for assets whose value isn't entirely dependent on industrial demand or, passing consumer trends. You want things that inherently hold value just by existing, independent of the supply chain.
So if gold perfectly solved the barter problem without starving society, why did we ever abandon it? How did we end up with pieces of paper and digital numbers on a screen?
Well, gold has one major flaw if you are an emperor with a massive army to fund. You can't just wish more of it into existence. Rulers got greedy.
Which introduces us to the oldest trick in the economic playbook. Money printing isn't some highly sophisticated modern economic tool, is it?
Not at all. History shows us it is a very basic mechanism of survival for indebted governments, and it never ends well.
Let's go back to that Roman emperor, Nero. He had a massive empire to fund, massive armies to pay, and citizens who liked their luxury. But he couldn't just create gold and silver out of thin air to pay for it all.
And taxing the citizens too much would start a riot.
Right. So what did he do? He quietly lowered the actual silver content of the Roman denarius coin.
It's so sneaky.
He literally called in the coins, melted them down, and mixed in cheaper metals like copper, but kept the face value the exact same. He effectively created new money out of thin air to pay his debts, just pocketing the difference.
This is called debasement. And once Nero started it, subsequent rulers just couldn't stop. They were addicted. They kept diluting the money until
the currency totally collapsed. Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because it's really easy to dismiss that as ancient history. I mean, paper money feels completely real to us today. I'm holding a dollar bill, it feels like a dollar.
Or it's tangible.
But then again, the Thai baht felt very real to people right up until the 1997 crisis, all right?
Absolutely it did. In Thailand, before 1997, the baht was pegged to the US dollar. It felt invincible.
Right.
People and businesses confidently took out massive loans in dollars, assuming their local currency would hold its value. Then the peg broke.
Oh, wow.
The currency collapsed. Overnight, the local cost of that dollar-denominated debt doubled, and businesses went bankrupt instantly. Paper money and the value we assign to it is purely an illusion of trust.
But surely, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, surely the experts running the Federal Reserve right now have better, more sophisticated tools than Nero mixing copper in a pot.
You would think so, but no. The tools look different, but the mechanism is identical. Today, instead of mixing copper into silver, governments just issue bonds. A bond is just an IOU. When the government needs money it doesn't have, it sells these IOUs. And who buys them? The central bank. But the central bank doesn't use tax dollars. They create digital reserves. They literally type numbers into a computer to credit a commercial bank's account, and boom, new money is created out of thin air to buy that debt.
So they just print it digitally?
Yes. Between 2008 and 2013 alone, the U.S. Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet by a staggering 220%.
Wait, 220% in 5 years?
Yep. The Bank of England expanded theirs by 350%. Easy money is a drug. It gives the economy a temporary high, it makes borrowing cheap, and everything feels great for a moment. But the withdrawal is devastating.
This just shatters the misconception that modern central banking is fundamentally different from ancient kings manipulating currency. It's the exact same shell game, just digitized and wrapped in complicated academic jargon.
Which is why you cannot just track the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, to understand inflation.
Why not? That's what everyone looks at.
Because the CPI can be manipulated. They swap out the cost of steak for the cost of hamburger meat to make the numbers look better.
That's crazy.
You need to track the expansion of the money supply itself, what economists call M2. When central banks expand their balance sheets, the purchasing power of your paycheck is mathematically shrinking, whether you feel it immediately at the grocery store or not.
So the Fed is sitting there, essentially watering down the drinks at the bar to keep the party going.
Pretty much.
But what happens when the party gets out of control? I mean, the Federal Reserve is legally tasked with fixing massive, complex economic problems. They're supposed to ensure full employment, stabilize prices, and maintain financial stability.
But they are trying to do all of this using essentially one primary tool, short-term interest rate.
Oh, we have to share this analogy from William Poole, the former Fed president. It is terrifyingly accurate. He compares the Federal Reserve to a pilot trying to guide a 900-foot, heavily loaded oil tanker into the Delaware Bay.
Right, so the captain of the ship tells the pilot they have to hit the dock exactly at high tide. But then he delivers the bad news: the ship has no reverse gear.
No reverse gear on a 900-foot tanker carrying millions of gallons of oil. That's insane.
It is. So to hit the dock on time, the pilot has to run the ship up the bay at absolute top speed, then cut the engines, coast, and just pray they timed the momentum perfectly to glide into the dock without smashing it to pieces.
Yikes.
You are flying blind without the instruments you actually need to safely maneuver.
Okay, I have to jump in here because that is wild. You're telling me we have an institution responsible for the entire American economy trying to fix unemployment, global trade imbalances, and financial stability, and their only real button to push is make borrowing cheaper or make borrowing expensive.
That's the button.
That's like trying to fix the plumbing in your bathroom by adjusting the water pressure for the entire city. You might get your sink to work, but you're blowing out pipes in 3 other neighborhoods.
Exactly. And that is the exact misconception we need to destroy. The public views the Fed as this all-powerful precision mechanic that can fix any economic issue.
Right, like they have a scalpel.
But in reality, adjusting interest rates cannot fix broken global supply chains. It cannot fix bad government regulations. It cannot force a business to invest in new technology. As Poole points out, in economics, you need at least as many policy instruments as you have policy goals. The Fed has three massive goals and basically one blunt instrument.
So if you're listening to this, the real takeaway for your own wallet is to stop waiting for the Federal Reserve to engineer a perfect soft landing for the economy. You have to build your own emergency buffers, stockpile your own cash reserves, and diversify your income, because the pilots flying the economy are operating with broken instruments.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because when the Fed pushes that make borrowing cheaper button, when they drop interest rates to zero and start printing trillions of dollars, we have to ask, who actually gets that money first?
Oh, this is the part that will make you angry. Because we're talking about quantitative easing, or QE, and zero interest rate policies. And the sources make a terrifyingly clear case. These policies deliberately inflate asset prices, which secretly supercharges wealth inequality.
Let's look at a specific date. November 3rd, 2010. The Federal Reserve launched a massive, radical experiment in quantitative easing. They were going to flood the banking system with cash. On the Federal Open Market Committee, there was exactly one dissenting vote, Thomas Hoenig.
Hoenig is fascinating. He was the Kansas City Fed president, but before that, he was a bank examiner on the ground during the farming and oil busts of the 1980s.
He saw the wreckage firsthand.
Right. He was the guy walking into failing banks, looking at the books and shutting them down. He knew exactly what happened when easy money stopped.
And Hoenig explicitly warned that flooding Wall Street with cheap money would do two things. First, it would push banks to make incredibly risky loans just to find a return on their money. Second, and more importantly, it would completely punish regular savers.
How so?
Think about the mechanics of this. If you were a responsible citizen keeping your money in a savings account, you were suddenly earning 0% interest. Meanwhile, real inflation was slowly eating away at your principal.
So you were being actively punished for doing the right thing.
Exactly.
And Hoenig was entirely right, because we need to explain how this cheap money actually flowed. When interest rates are zero, giant corporations don't necessarily take that cheap debt and build new factories or hire more workers. I mean, why build a factory if everyday consumers don't have the money to buy your products?
That makes no sense to do.
Right. So instead of investing in growth, as the sources point out, these corporations took that cheap debt and used it to buy back their own stock.
Which artificially drives up the stock price, enriching the executives who are paid in stock options and the wealthy investors who already own the assets.
While the rest of us get nothing.
Meanwhile, the middle-class worker sees their wages stay flat while the cost of a home skyrockets because all that cheap money has to go somewhere. It flows straight into real estate and the stock market.
They didn't save Main Street. They just subsidized Wall Street's casino chips.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. This completely destroys the deeply held belief that the post-2008 bailouts and interventions were designed to help the middle class recover. They didn't. They created what economists call a K-shaped economy.
Break down that K-shape for us.
Imagine the letter K. The line goes two ways from the middle. If you owned assets, stocks, real estate, fine art, your wealth skyrocketed upwards on the top arm of the K, fueled by all that cheap borrowing.
Okay, and the bottom arm.
If you were on the bottom arm, a wage earner relying on a weekly paycheck and a traditional savings account, your purchasing power plummeted downwards because your wages couldn't keep up with the asset inflation.
And the reality here is brutal, but necessary to accept. Recognizing that playing it safe by holding all your money in cash in a zero-interest environment is mathematically a losing game. You are guaranteed to lose purchasing power over time. You have to own hard assets, whether that is real estate, equities, or commodities, to survive asset inflation.
Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to pause and actually look at this from the Federal Reserve's perspective.
Sure, okay. I hear what you're saying about Main Street versus Wall Street, but Let's be fair to Ben Bernanke and the Fed for a second. In late 2008, the entire global financial system was literally days away from total systemic collapse.
It was terrifying.
This wasn't a normal recession. Credit markets were completely freezing up. Businesses couldn't make payroll. There was a very real scenario where ordinary people would walk up to an ATM, put in their debit card, and the screen would just go blank. No money would come out.
Right.
The banking system was having a massive cardiac arrest. Didn't they have to print that money just to keep the lights on? By forcing interest rates to zero and pumping liquidity into the system, they prevented mass bankruptcies and kept people employed.
You're right. It was an absolute triage operation to stop the bleeding of the global economy. In that specific moment of panic, injecting liquidity was arguably the only way to prevent a second Great Depression. The banks wouldn't lend to each other because they were terrified of the toxic mortgages on each other's books. The Fed stepped in as the lender of last resort.
Right. And triage is fine. If someone is bleeding out on the table, you give them adrenaline. But they left the patient on life support for a decade.
That's the issue.
You cannot honestly call it an emergency temporary measure if you are still printing trillions of dollars 10 years later. At what point does the medicine become the poison?
And that is the exact trap of their own making. Once they injected that much liquidity, the market became physically addicted to it.
So they couldn't stop.
No. Any attempt to withdraw the stimulus to raise interest rates back to a normal historical level would trigger the exact catastrophic market crash they were trying to avoid in the first place. When debt is that cheap, entire corporate structures are built on the assumption that it will stay cheap forever. If you raise rates, those zombie companies instantly collapse. They were trapped.
So, what does this all mean? How do we synthesize all of this from ancient Rome clipping coins to the 1997 Thai baht to the 2008 crash to today's inflation?
It all comes down to a brilliant quote from 1873 by Walter Bagehot, the legendary editor of The Economist. He observed that the main source of profit in banking relies on the smallness of requisite capital.
Let's translate that. He means operating with almost no safety net.
Precisely. In the modern era, banks often operate with incredibly thin equity, sometimes as low as 2%.
2%?
Yes. To put that in perspective, if a bank has $100 in assets, only $2 of that is actual shareholder equity. The other $98 is borrowed money or customer deposits.
Wait, hold on. That's like buying a $500,000 house with only $10,000 down, but doing it on a $1 trillion global scale. That's terrifying. If the value of their assets drops by just 1%, half of their entire equity is instantly wiped out.
Exactly. It makes the entire system extraordinarily fragile. When things go well, the banks make massive profits on all that leveraged borrowed money, and they keep it for themselves in the form of dividends and bonuses.
But when things go bad...
When things go bad and that razor-thin ice breaks like it did with mortgage-backed securities, the banks face immediate insolvency.
And who steps in?
The taxpayer.
Yep, the taxpayer via the Federal Reserve printing more money to bail them out.
So we have built a global economy completely addicted to easy money, where risk is entirely socialized, but profit is strictly privatized.
It is a systemic flaw that incentivizes reckless behavior by financial institutions because they know the ultimate safety net is the debasement of the public's currency. They know the Fed will turn on the money printer rather than let the system clear out the bad debt. Wow. We don't want you just listening to this and nodding along. We want you to look at your own financial situation. Sometime in the next 24 hours, sit down and look at your own net worth.
Highly recommend this.
Calculate exactly what percentage of your wealth is sitting in fiat cash money in a checking or basic savings account that is actively being debased by this invisible inflation tax. Then, calculate what percentage is in assets, things that actually benefit from these easy money policies, like property, index funds, or hard commodities.
Once you have those two percentages, make one specific move this week to protect your purchasing power. Move some cash into an inflation-protected bond, a hard asset, or a diversified fund. You have to take control of your own steering wheel because, as we've established, the Fed's wheel is broken.
This has been a heavy, eye-opening dive, but we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on.
Let's hear it.
If central banks are currently trapped, if they're unable to raise interest rates to historical norms without crashing this massive debt-loaded market, but entirely unable to keep them artificially low without causing runaway inflation, what happens when the ultimate fiat currency, the US dollar, finally loses the trust of the rest of the world? When the modern Emperor Nero runs out of copper to mix into the silver?
It is a question that every major institutional investor is quietly asking themselves right now.
Next time, we are taking a sharp turn away from economics. We're diving into the bizarre, high-stakes world of sleep science and uncovering why almost everything you've been told about getting your 8 hours is completely wrong.
Until then, keep questioning the consensus.
And keep an eye on your silver coins. Catch you on the next deep dive.